Hello, and welcome to class 13. And today I'm going to introduce you to an online program that helps with mastering the writing of APA research papers called the Purdue OWL, and I've given you the websites to go to, and I'm just going to run through it with you quickly. You want to make sure that you're looking at the research paper because they have various examples, but this is obviously consistent with the APA manual, and it isn't a substitution for reading or looking up sections in the APA manual, but I find it, and other students have given me feedback, that this is a bit of an easier approach. So I'm going to spend a few minutes going through this with you, and I strongly encourage you to also look at this website and read through it, and let me know if you find it helpful. So let's start with some of the basics. Let's start with the running head, which is something that many students confuse. And it is something that has a slight change in the newer APA manual. So the running head is a shortened version of the paper's full title. And on the very first page, you start off by writing in running head, semicolon, or colon rather, I'm sorry, and then capitalize the shortened title. Now you'll see that the running head can't exceed 50 characters, and you'll see that it will be on every single page of your paper, except after the first page, the words running head are removed. So you would still have the shortened title, all capitalized, flush left, but the actual word running head is only on the very first page. And then flush right, you would have the page number, and you start with the very first page. All right, page number. The other thing I want to talk about is, of course, the title. And so the first page would have a title. Now, this example is really an unfortunate one because, gosh, I don't know that there could be something that I know less about than Polish-English case study of code switching in sequential bilingualism. So it's not very relevant to us, but I think it is useful as an example. And I strongly recommend, and over the semester I've mentioned a few articles. Look at the articles we've read. That's why we've read so many. And use those articles in terms of the actual content. This will certainly help you with the format, but with the actual content, I think the articles that we have been reading are going to be a much, much better example of sort of content things. Also keep in mind, though, if you're looking at some of the articles we read, that the APA manual has recently changed, so some of the formatting issues that are in the articles you're reading are no longer being used, and so this article and of course your APA manual would determine what the actual format is. Okay, so the title should summarize the paper's main idea and identify the variables under discussion and the relationships between them. So let's take an example that we might use, which is a good title might be The Effects of Non-Contingent Reinforcement on out-of-seat behavior in a child with autism, something like that. So you're capturing, you're summarizing the main idea. You're using non-contingent reinforcement to address a problem behavior, in this case out of seat. You're indicating the subject, the participant, and you want to keep it brief and simple. You also would include your name, and you would include your institutional affiliation. All right. So let's go on to the abstract. Again, another area that we've talked a little bit about this, and go back to that first lecture that I gave in week 1 on the components of a manuscript. That talked more about the content. Again, this is talking about both content and format, but that one was focused on the content, and so you could go back to that one and looking at that and reading this. Hopefully you'll be able to put this all together. But the abstract is a brief summary of the paper, allowing the readers to quickly review the main points and purpose of the paper. Now, as I mentioned in week 1, it's important to understand the purpose of an abstract in order to write a good abstract, and that is that it's got to be self-contained. So the reader should be able to read your abstract and not have read anything about your paper and really have a good understanding of exactly what it is that you did. So the abstract would contain all the elements: what you did, why you did it, the results, the design, and the implications. So, for example, taking this non-contingent reinforcement, if I can quickly sort of organize an abstract in my head. So you might start off by indicating that non-contingent reinforcement is a procedure that has, what it is, maybe one sentence, and that it has been shown to be effective to decrease some maladaptive behaviors. Then talk about maybe a functional assessment was completed, indicated that the participants' out-of-seat behavior was maintained by attention, and then explain the procedure. So the individual was non-contingently reinforced, or attention was non-contingently provided every 30 seconds, and out-of-seat behavior was measured. The results of a reversal design, so you mentioned your design, indicated that subsequent to the use of non-contingent reinforcement, out-of-seat behavior dramatically decreased. Further, the frequency of non-contingent reinforcement was able to be decreased from 30 seconds to 10 minutes without an increase in the target behavior. Then you might say something about the implications, let's add one more thing. The results of a social validity measure indicated that teachers found the intervention to be easy to use and effective. The implications then this could be a very effective way to treat common behavior problems in a school setting, blah, blah, blah. But what are the implications of the paper? Now, all of that you need to say in 150 to 250 words. I think that people tend to do the abstract last when they're writing a paper, and personally, I think that's a mistake. I think the abstract really forces you in about 200 words to summarize everything that you've done, and that is going to serve you well to writing each of the other components of a manuscript. So I think spend time on the abstract, get a really good, tight abstract, and that's going to help you to write the rest of your paper. All right. Some of the formatting issues, those are the things in blue, by the way. The content stuff is in green. The word abstract should be centered, not capitalized. And you see there's no indentation. And as I mentioned, 150 to 200 words. All right, so on to the introduction. And again, remember, every single page is going to have this running head, and you're going to have pagination up here. The introduction, you should provide the theoretical and empirical background for your research. So you explain the important terminology that you're using and why you're doing the study. So you might start off with the introduction by just talking about maybe out-of-seat behavior and why that's a problem, or maybe you're going to feel more comfortable in talking about it in terms of common behavior problems that are found in school or whatever. But what's the general issue or the general problem that you're addressing? Then you're going to get into the particular interventions. So some of the interventions that have been used to address this particular target behavior are X, Y, and Z. Now remember, you're tying everything together. One of the things that I am looking most for in the introduction is that things are tied together, so that you don't just have a bunch of studies over here and a bunch of studies over there, and it's not clear why you included all those studies. So things like, here's the interventions that have been done, but what are some of the problems with it? So differential reinforcement, for example, I'm sure there's plenty of studies that have shown that some kind of differential reinforcement has been effective. However, the downside with some of those, and you could find some references that talk about this, of any kind of differential reinforcement program, is they could be difficult to do with integrity. That's when you could introduce non-contingent reinforcement, and then talk about generally what non-contingent reinforcement does, some of the studies that have been done, some of the successes as a function of non-contingent reinforcement. Then you end it by having a final paragraph that ties everything together. So in your introduction, you've introduced the problem. You've talked about ways that the literature has approached it. You focus in on the interventions that you're going to use, and you're tying it together with, this is why I'm doing that. And then you're going to end it with the purpose. So specifically, what is it? The last paragraph summarizes the purpose. What are you doing? Now, that could be, I mean, maybe you would say your study is going to simply be a replication of another study that's been done. Great. Replications are important. Could be a systematic replication. That is, there's a little change. And that could be what you're doing. But what exactly is your purpose? What exactly is your hypothesis? And that should all be tied to the rest of the introduction. All right, let's go back to some of the technical issues. So let's talk about authors and how you how you include some of the studies. So if you're going to be talking about, say, you're talking about out-of-seat behavior, and you say out-of-seat behavior in school settings has been problematic. Okay, well, there's two studies, Smith and Jones. So Smith and Jones in 2009. Well, you're going to say, if you're basically talking about their literature and you're paraphrasing what they're saying, then you're going to put them in parentheses. So out-of-seat behavior has proven to be result in poor academic performance. I don't know if that's true, but let's say it is. And let's say you found a study. Then you'd put in parentheses, if that's what they concluded, Smith and Jones, 2009. When you include the authors in the parentheses, you use this plus symbol in order to indicate if you have multiple authors. However, if you're going to just talk about the authors, here we go, but not in parentheses, then you use the and. Are you with me? So if you're going to paraphrase the authors and then put them in parentheses, because that's what they said, then you're going to use this plus symbol. If, however, they're not going to be parenthesized and you're going to say specifically that Smith and Jones said, then you use an and. The other thing is when you have 3 or more authors, the very first time that you discuss them, and if they're ones you're going to talk about over and over again, here we go, Martin, whatever this name is, this name, and Charles. Now, you don't want to repeat all of that 20 times or 10 times or even 5 times in your paper. Then subsequently, when you use it, you can say the first time you have to list the full reference. Subsequent times, you can just say Martin et al. And people confuse this. Nothing after the et, and a period after the all, and then, of course, the year. All right. What else do I want to say about this? I think that's sufficient. Let's get into the method section. Oh, the headings, of course. So this is where we start to talk about, when we talk about techniques, again, another area that people have problems with, and this is a recent change. So most of the articles that you're reading are going to do this a little differently. So you have to use this particular format. So this is a level 1. Actually, the levels are simpler now than they used to be. This is a level 1 heading, which means it's bolded, it's centered. A level 2 under the method is bolded, but it's flush left. Okay, so here's a reference that they give where you can talk about the levels. I suggest you go to the APA manual and look at the levels. It's a pretty straightforward thing. There's only 5, I think 5 levels of headings, and just to make sure you stay straight with them. You're primarily going to use 1, 2, and 3. I don't know if there's a 3 in here. I don't think so, no. But you're primarily, for your paper, I'm going to guess you're going to use certainly 1, you're certainly going to use 2, maybe you'll use a 3. I doubt that you'll get into a 4 and a 5. So look at those. If you have questions about them, talk to me. All right, so let's talk about the purpose of the method section. Again, go back to that first week when we talked about this in a lot more detail. But basically, in the method section, and this is where the articles that we're reading are going to be much more useful than this one on bilingualism. But I think the things you want to include are things like participants and settings. So you might have 1 or 2 or maybe 3 participants in your study. So you want to talk about them, and settings seem to be important. So the example that we're sort of talking about, this might be a classroom setting. Well, obviously that's very important to indicate that and give some of the specifics of the classroom, the other kids that are in the classroom, etc. You might also, you certainly want to include the target behavior. So we need to give some specifics of the target behavior, the operational definition of out-of-seat behavior in our example. How was it defined? Was there IOA that was being done? And hopefully there was. The observational system. So how were these data collected? Any materials that you might use, the actual procedure. So what exactly happened? Well, at the start, they carried around a little timer. It went off every 30 seconds. When it went off, a teacher or an aide went up to the individual, and regardless of what they were or were not doing, they were reinforced. Rather given attention. And then finally the design. What kind of design did you use? And I think in my example I said a reversal design. So you would explain the reversal design. All right. What else is there? I think I've covered all of that. The results, now this is where it's really different. Within the text, here, a traditional study, there is going to be a lot of results written out. Typically, for applied behavior analysis, since the data are so important and the figures, we generally let the figures do the talking for us, if you will, except you certainly within the text want to summarize the data collected. So you want to talk about the mean, the level, the trends, the IOA, treatment integrity, those kinds of things. So you would explain something like figure 1 shows that during baseline conditions, Billy was out of his seat on average 25 times in a 1-hour observation period or something. And then during intervention, when the non-contingent reinforcement was applied, that was reduced to less than 2 times in an hour period, or you might describe it as rate. And you would do that for each subject, and so explain the mean, the level, the trends. Again, also talking about IOA. IOA was collected. You described it in the method, and what were the results of the IOA. Treatment integrity was collected. You're going to explain that in the method section and talk about what the treatment integrity was. And then, of course, you're going to actually show the figure, and we'll get to that in a minute. All right. Let's get to the discussion. Now, again, the discussion, you're going to evaluate and interpret your data. So you state your hypothesis, whether your hypothesis was confirmed, and discuss possible implications of your findings. So more specifically, as we talked about in week 1, you start off by that very first paragraph. You evaluate the results. So something along the lines with the example we're giving would be data indicate that non-contingent reinforcement substantially decreased out-of-seat behavior in a boy or in 3 subjects or whatever it is, and that the frequency of non-contingent reinforcement was able to be decreased from whatever it was to some terminal, and that teachers reported that they found the procedures to be acceptable. Great. So that needs to be tied to that last paragraph in your intro about what your purpose was. And then the rest of the discussion is your opportunity to talk about, to interpret those results. So, things like unanticipated findings. It was observed that when out-of-seat behavior decreased, so did disruptive behavior in 2 of the 3 participants. Well, that would be a cool unanticipated finding. What are some of the limitations? Because every study has limitations. There might be some missing data because a child was ill. There might have been some malfunctions with the timers. Whatever it is, whatever the limitations of the study might be, you're going to talk a little bit about those. And then, of course, implications. Is this something that could be used in these kinds of settings? Could it be generalized to other kinds of settings? Could it be generalized to other kinds of target behaviors? What exactly are the implications of this kind of procedure? And then finally, future research, which might be related to that. Future research might look at how decreasing one common behavior problem in a classroom setting might affect other problems in that classroom setting, or how it's related to academic performance or something like that. But those are basically the things that you're addressing in the discussion. The first paragraph, give the results, and then after that, just you interpret those results. All right, that brings us to the references. So, without getting into all the details, here the Purdue OWL program gives you a reference you can look up to reference how to write references. And of course, the APA manual has a whole chapter dedicated to references and exactly how to do references. Some of the major points are reference section is not bolded. They are in alphabetical order. All right. Then we've got the figures. Now, you may or may not have an appendix. I would guess you're not. That might be if you were using, you have some particular materials that you were using. You could put, for example, your social integrity measure in an appendix if you wanted to, although it's really not necessary. But then, of course, more interestingly, you have your figures, and you certainly will have one of these, and you will certainly have a better figure than this. But the important parts with the figures is each figure must be accompanied by a legend and a caption placed beneath the figure. The title of the figure, figure 1 in this case, should be italicized and the legend double-spaced. And there's also tables if you're going to have a table, but you probably won't. Another appendix, and that's it. So yours very likely will just contain one figure, which is fine, maybe two figures, which is fine also. So that is essentially it. I want you to go through this, use this OWL program, and if you have any questions, then our next meeting, I've set time aside specifically to talk about this. So let's try to spend some time this week in going over this program, looking at the APA manual, and then next week we will review, and I will be happy to try to answer any of your questions about this. Have a good week, and I will see you next week.